Before there were buttons to press and screens to tap, before bulbs flickered awake with a whisper of electricity, and before night was something we could banish with a switch, there was only the flicker of flame. And in that flicker, for thousands of years, humanity found warmth, safety, and eventually light. We begin not with the candle, but with its ancestor, the fire that once danced in caves, crackled in hearths, and hovered on sticks. Fire was never invented. It was discovered, then curded. It had to be learned, like a wild animal, feared and tamed. And when the first humans understood how to make fire, they didn't just gain heat or the means to cook. They gained something else, the ability to push back the dark. In those early days, fire wasn't just a tool, it was a companion. Long before language became complex, long before names for stars or tools or seasons were born, there was fire, burning slowly beside those who huddled for warmth, for comfort, for safety. A flickering flame became a symbol of presence, of company, of survival. It was the first true light we controlled, and it changed everything. But flames, left open and untamed, were large and unpredictable. You couldn't bring them easily inside without risk. You couldn't carry them without caution. The hearth was the heart of the home, because it was the only place the fire could safely live. But even so, there were moments when something smaller was needed, something quiet, contained, personal. This is where the idea of the candle begins to take shape. The first primitive lights, what we now call rushlights, were not candles in the modern sense. They were little more than plant stalks dipped in fat, set to burn for a few brief minutes. In ancient Egypt, as far back as 3000 BCE, people soaked reeds in melted animal fat and let them dry. When lit, they offered a brief, smoky light, imperfect, temporary, but still, a step. Imagine a small chamber in ancient Thebes, the walls lined with painted symbols, a mother feeding her child while a rushlight burns nearby, a scribe hunched over papyrus, the glow of the flame guiding each careful stroke. These were not bright rooms, but they were not entirely dark either. The flicker of flame offered enough, just enough. Meanwhile, other civilizations experimented in parallel. In India and China, early lamp technologies included hollowed shells or vessels filled with oils and wicks made of fibrous plants. In China, whale fat and bamboo paper became tools of illumination. Each region, each culture sought ways to shape the dark, not to eliminate it, but to soften its edges. And then came the Romans. The Romans, practical and industrious, refined the art of light. They began to shape tallow and wax into molds, to produce candles with uniformity and intent. They recognized that light could be portable, scheduled, and symbolic. Papyrus was rolled into tight spirals, dipped into rendered animal fats, cooled and stored for future use. These early candles were not pleasant. They smoked and sputtered, and they filled small rooms with the odor of burning flesh. But they served a purpose. In the cold stone villas of Roman Britain or the bustling apartments of Pompeii, candles guided the evening. They weren't only functional. Even then, light was emotional. A small child frightened of the dark found reassurance in a flame. A traveler arriving late would search for a window lit by candlelight and know he was home. In temples, candles were burned in honor of the gods, symbols of reverence and hope. Their glow was prayer in physical form. After the fall of the Roman Empire, much knowledge was scattered, but the candle remained. It was too essential, too personal to be forgotten. Through the early medieval centuries, people continued to use tallow candles made from sheep or cattle fat. They were greasy, they emitted a strong odor when lit, but they were accessible. The poor used them daily, making small batches at home. It was common for families to have a pot of melted fat by the hearth and dip wicks into it as needed. And yet, for all their commonality, candles remained magical. In monasteries, where silence was sacred and order was everything, the candle took on new purpose. Monks used them to mark time. The passing of an hour wasn't tracked by numbers on a wall, but by the length of wax consumed. A 12-inch candle might burn for 4 hours, a shorter one for a single prayer cycle. Candle clocks were born, not as precision instruments, but as quiet indicators of rhythm. Life in the monastery moved to the pace of wax. Consider this image, a cloister before dawn, the corridor dim. A solitary monk moves with slow steps, his breath visible in the chill air. In one hand, he carries a candle stub, its flame shivering slightly. In the other, a book of morning hymns. The flame guides him not just through space, but through time. Beeswax candles, unlike tallow, burned cleanly. They gave off a pleasant scent, almost sweet. But beeswax was rare and costly. Only churches and the elite could afford them. This created an unintended hierarchy of light. The poor lit their evenings with greasy, smoking tallow. The rich bathed their feasts and scriptures in golden, honey-scented glow. This distinction wasn't lost on people. In paintings from the Renaissance, light became symbolic. Candles depicted in portraits weren't just decorative. A single burning candle could symbolize wisdom, love, faith, or the passing of time. The way it leaned, the way it smoked, the way its wax pooled, all carried meaning. Meanwhile, in towns and cities, chandlers, candle makers, established shops. They boiled tallow in large vats, dipped wicks repeatedly to build layers, and sold their wares to households, churches, and even city officials. The candle was no longer a miracle. It was a business. But still, it was personal. No two candles burned quite the same. A breeze could shape the flame. A poor batch of tallow could cause rapid consumption. Wicks burned unevenly. And so, people developed small rituals around their use. They trimmed the wick. They watched the wax. They snuffed and relit. They didn't take light for granted. In many homes, the lighting of the evening candle was a moment of quiet. It marked the shift from work to rest, from public to private. It was a signal that the day was done and reflection could begin. In that way, the candle wasn't just a source of light. It was a ceremony. There is something deeply human about the candle. Unlike oil lamps or torches or later gas lights, the candle invites closeness. Its flame is modest. It doesn't roar, it beckons. It is not meant to illuminate entire rooms, but to soften them. It is not designed to reveal, but to suggest. The light of a candle leaves shadows, shadows that move, dance, breathe. And in those shadows, the imagination stirs. A child listens to a story told in candlelight and sees kingdoms. A writer composes by its glow and hears silence. A mourner prays beside a candle and finds company. By the 13th century, candle use was widespread throughout Europe. Churches ordered them in bulk. Guilds regulated chandler practices. Cities passed laws requiring citizens to carry candles or lanterns at night. The candle became not just light, but law. Still, it retained its mystery. And all the while it burned, slowly, gently, without complaint. We think of invention as sudden, dramatic, world-changing. But some inventions creep in. They arrive slowly, change everything subtly, and fade without notice. The candle is one such invention. It didn't just give us light, it changed how we related to darkness. It allowed us to write longer, read longer, dream longer. It let us gather after the sun was gone. It created intimacy, solitude, reflection. And perhaps most importantly, it asked nothing in return. The candle, in all its quiet dignity, may seem like a simple tool. Wax, a wick, a flame, but its simplicity hides centuries of refinement, innovation, and wonder. In this part of our journey, we look closely at the materials, the methods, and the mysteries of how candles evolved, how we took something elemental and shaped it into a companion for centuries. To begin, let's return to the basics. What exactly is a candle? At its core, a candle is a slow, controlled burn. A wick draws liquefied wax upward through capillary action, feeding a flame that both melts and consumes its fuel. The flame sustains itself until the wax is gone or the wick fails. But every element, every decision about material, shape, and process affects how the candle lives. Let's begin with the wick. In early times, wicks were often crude. Strips of rolled papyrus, bits of cotton rag, dried grasses twisted into cords. The earliest candle makers didn't yet understand the chemistry behind combustion, but through trial and error, they knew what burned and what didn't. As candles became more common, wick making became a craft unto itself. By the Middle Ages, wicks were commonly made from twisted cotton, tightly wound to provide consistent burn rates. But even a perfect wick is useless without wax. And wax has a history all its own. The earliest candles used tallow, rendered fat from cows or sheep. It was plentiful and easy to produce, especially in agrarian societies where livestock was a staple. But tallow candles had drawbacks. They smoked, they smelled, they didn't store well in heat, and they dripped, thick, greasy rivulets that stained surfaces and wasted light. Still, for most people, they were the only option. Tallow was a byproduct of survival. It came from animals already being raised for food. The candle became just one more way of using everything. In winter months, families would set aside time to render fat, prepare wicks, and create enough candles to last until spring. In many rural households, candle making was a seasonal tradition, passed from one generation to the next, part of the quiet rhythm of survival. But there was another option: beeswax. Beeswax was, and still is, a marvel of nature. Created by honeybees, it is secreted in tiny flakes, chewed and shaped into the combs that store honey and larvae. Harvesting it requires care and respect, and once melted and strained, beeswax becomes a golden, aromatic substance, firm to the touch, slightly sticky, and naturally fragrant. When burned, it produces a steady, bright flame with minimal smoke. In medieval Europe, beeswax was a luxury. Monasteries kept apiaries not only for honey but for wax. Churches prized it, ordering vast quantities for altars and ceremonies. Royal households used beeswax candles in chandeliers and banquet halls. To burn beeswax was to burn wealth. To walk into a room lit by its glow was to enter a world of privilege. The scent alone, warm, faintly sweet, almost floral, became associated with the sacred. In some traditions, it was believed that beeswax held purifying properties. It symbolized the incorruptible nature of divine light. Over time, societies discovered other waxes too. In the 18th century, a remarkable substance was extracted from the head cavities of sperm whales, spermaceti. It produced a hard, white wax that burned longer and cleaner than tallow. Its light was brighter, and it resisted softening in heat. Spermaceti candles became popular in the upper middle class, especially in cities where whale oil was imported through maritime trade. But like beeswax, spermaceti had its cost. This time not just in coin, but in ethics. The whaling industry grew vast and destructive. Entire fleets were built around the harvest of oil and wax. Candles, once made at home, had now become part of global commerce, linked to oceans, ships, and empires. In parallel, in the far reaches of the Americas and Asia, plant-based waxes began to appear. In Japan, the wax tree provided raw material for smooth-burning candles. In parts of China, seed oils and nut waxes were used for lamps and light. By the 19th century, yet another innovation arrived: paraffin. Paraffin wax, derived from petroleum, coal, or shale, was first refined in the 1830s. Colorless and odorless, it quickly became the wax of choice for industrial candle production. It was inexpensive, easily processed, and consistent in its burn. By the end of the century, paraffin had overtaken tallow and even beeswax in many parts of the world. The mass production of candles had begun. Factories now replaced the chandler's shop. Machines dipped, molded, and packaged candles by the thousands. The hand-trimmed wick gave way to spools of uniform thread. The process was faster, the product more affordable. But something, perhaps something sacred, was lost. To understand this, imagine the contrast. A medieval chandler stands in a shop that smells of warm wax and wool. He dips wick after wick into a vat of tallow, lets them cool, and repeats the process, layer by layer. Each candle takes time. Each is watched, judged, adjusted. There's pride in the work. Now imagine a factory floor. A conveyor belt carries molds past nozzles, wax pours, wicks are centered by machine. The candles are cooled in rows, boxed and shipped, hundreds per hour. One is slow, one is fast, one is personal, one is efficient. Neither is wrong, but only one invites wonder. Throughout these changes, something interesting happened. Candles became standardized. They were now all the same height, the same width. Their wicks behaved predictably. Their burn time could be measured to the minute. And yet, in homes around the world, people still lit them with the same reverence. They still trimmed the wick. They still shielded the flame. They still watched the wax pool, waiting for that first steady flicker. It's here that we see something important. That even as technology advanced, the ritual of light remained. Children still asked to blow out candles before bed. Lovers still lit them for warmth, for mood, for closeness. Faiths still used them as symbols of hope, of life, of memory. In Judaism, the Shabbat candle is lit every Friday night to mark the beginning of rest. In Christianity, candles are used during Advent, Lent, baptisms, and funerals. In Buddhism, they're placed before statues of the Buddha as offerings. In Hinduism, oil lamps and candles are lit during Diwali to celebrate the triumph of light over darkness. Even in secular life, we find them: a candle on a birthday cake, a vigil for someone lost, a table set for a quiet evening. There's something about fire that speaks to something deeper than words. It is primitive and modern, fragile and eternal. It asks us to pause, to stay, to notice. And so, though the materials changed, from tallow to beeswax to spermaceti to paraffin, the meaning remained. The candle became more than wax and wick. It became time made visible, a moment slow burning held in place. You could measure a night not by the hour, but by how many candles it took. You could mark a ceremony not by sound, but by how long the flame was allowed to glow. You could remember a person not by photograph or song, but by a small light flickering in their name. Even as the world turned toward gaslight and bulbs, even as we wired our homes and forgot the scent of beeswax in hallways, some part of us remembered, because to watch a candle burn is to remember that light is precious, that it must be tended, that it doesn't always arrive instantly, that sometimes we must make space for it. Wax, wick, and wonder. 3 elements, 1 gift, and still, quietly, always waiting to be lit again. There are inventions that change how we live, and then there are those that change how we see. The candle did both, not just because it offered light, but because it slowly redefined what that light meant. In the flickering dance of a single flame, people saw more than warmth or visibility. They saw structure, they saw sacredness, and eventually they saw power. To understand this shift, we must begin in silence, in a stone chapel just before dawn. The walls are cool and damp. The scent is of dust and old wax. A row of candles glows along the altar, each flame mirrored faintly in the brass of candlesticks polished the night before. A monk moves slowly, his hands cupped to shield the flame as he lights one taper after another. There is no electricity here, no switch, no hurry, just the steady illumination of a space held sacred. This is not just ritual, it is hierarchy. Because for centuries, light was not equal, it was a sign of privilege. A symbol of order. In medieval Europe, the distribution of light inside a building reflected the social order outside of it. The closer you were to wealth or power, the more light you had. Castles, cathedrals, noble homes, these were places where beeswax candles burned. Their golden glow bathed marble, tapestry, and manuscript alike. Their fragrance filled rooms not only with scent, but with the weight of significance. Meanwhile, the homes of common people remained dim. A tallow candle here, a rushlight there, smoke on the ceiling, soot in the lungs. And yet even these humble lights were fiercely protected, hoarded, saved, cherished. A single candle might be split in half, a stub reused. Light was precious because it was scarce. Scarcity turned candles into currency. In some towns they were taxed, in others regulated. The Catholic Church, understanding the symbolic power of candles, controlled their production and sale. Special days called for special candles, tall, white, unscented for mourning, fat, braided ones for festivals. Consider this. A child born into a peasant home might see only a handful of beeswax candles in their lifetime. Each one would mark a threshold, perhaps a wedding, a funeral, a procession. And when the candle burned low, so too did the moment it marked. It was light, as punctuation. In royal courts, candles were more than tools. They were architectural elements. Great chandeliers, called girandoles, hung from ceilings in palaces and banqueting halls, each branch holding candles in symmetrical arrangements. Entire evenings were structured around maintaining that light. Servants assigned to nothing but candle care, trimming, replacing, snuffing, relighting, moved like shadows, barely noticed. The candles themselves were statements. Their height, their purity, even their arrangement conveyed messages to guests. A chandelier fully lit for a dinner in Paris under Louis XIV might signal full favor. A room lit only by wall sconces might indicate a less formal occasion. In this world, light was etiquette. And yet, even as the elite adorned their halls with hundreds of flames, the true power of candles lay not in their brightness, but in their meaning. Religious institutions understood this better than anyone. In Christian traditions, the Paschal candle, lit each Easter, symbolized the resurrection. Its size and solemn lighting were choreographed to echo the return of light after death. Smaller votive candles lit in prayer represented intentions, hopes, or devotions. Even today, one can walk into a chapel and see rows of flickering flames, each one a quiet voice in the dark. In Judaism, the Shabbat candles mark the sacred entry into rest. 2 flames, representing remember and observe, are lit before sundown, bringing peace into the home. The lighting itself is a mitzvah, a blessing, a ritual older than electricity, perhaps older than language. In Hinduism, light is the presence of divinity. During Diwali, families line homes and windows with candles and lamps, welcoming Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity. Each light is a declaration. Darkness may surround us, but it does not own us. In Buddhism, candles are often placed on altars as offerings. They represent the light of wisdom illuminating the darkness of ignorance. The act of lighting a candle is a meditation, a mindfulness made visible. And in Islam, while candles are not ritualized in the same way, their presence during quiet moments, whether during Ramadan, in reflection, or in preparation for prayer, holds an unspoken symbolism of serenity and stillness. Across cultures, the candle became a bridge, not just between light and dark, but between the material and the spiritual. A lit candle was not just illumination, it was intention. But light could also be control. In cities and towns, candles were once a form of law enforcement. In 17th century London, for example, the lack of street lighting meant that anyone caught walking after dusk without a candle or lantern could be fined. Darkness was considered dangerous, breeding grounds for thieves, conspirators, and mischief. To carry light was to mark yourself as lawful, as visible, as one of us. In certain castles and manors, rooms were assigned light based on rank. A guest of high status might be given 2 or 3 candles for their chambers. A lesser guest, only 1. Servants, none. They moved in the dark. Candles defined curfews. In many places, the hour of candle lighting signaled the start of nighttime quiet. Church bells rang out at twilight, known as curfew bells, reminding citizens to extinguish flames, retire indoors, and cease labor. The word curfew itself comes from the Old French couvre-feu, cover the fire. In this way, the candle didn't just represent time, it controlled it. The passage of hours was once tracked by the slow burn of marked candles, each line a measure. A candle with evenly spaced metal balls embedded inside would drop them into a dish as the wax melted, offering an audible chime to mark time's advance. In East Asia, similar concepts were used, timekeeping not by tick or talk, but by the rhythm of burning wax. This idea that time could melt away shaped how people understood mortality. The candle, unlike the clock, did not repeat itself. Once burned, it was gone. Irrecoverable, a single use, like a day or a life. Poets and philosophers took notice. In the 17th century, metaphysical poets like Robert Herrick wrote lines such as, "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying." Though not about candles specifically, the spirit of impermanence hovered in all things. A burning candle reminded the viewer that moments were temporary. That light, like youth, could not be stored. This gave rise to a genre of painting known as vanitas, still life compositions featuring skulls, extinguished candles, hourglasses, and wilting flowers. Each element a reminder of mortality. The candle's flicker, its smoke trailing upward, became a metaphor for the soul, for fate, for the end. And yet, there was beauty in that. A kind of comfort in knowing that even light had its limits. It made people pay attention. It made them pause. In the Enlightenment, candles lit salons where philosophers debated the nature of reason and truth. In revolutionary France, they burned beside drafts of new constitutions. In colonial America, they guided conversations about liberty and land. And in every case, the flame that illuminated ideas was also a symbol, knowledge burning in the dark. By the early 1800s, candle usage reached its peak. Whale oil and spermaceti made production more efficient. Molded candles replaced hand-dipped ones. Chandlers became manufacturers. Cities issued patents. Light was now scalable, economical, replicable. But the candle still held a place of reverence. Even in war, soldiers wrote letters by candlelight. Nurses tended the wounded with flickering tapers. Lovers counted days by the number of candles they'd burned, waiting for return. Every flame was both now and then, a moment of presence and memory. It's worth imagining what a room would have looked like, lit only by candles. The shadows, the flickering reflections on glass, the way faces were half lit, half hidden, the warmth of it, the stillness. In such a room, silence held more meaning, words carried differently, thoughts felt larger somehow, because the light made space for them. The candle did not interrupt. It did not glare, it did not dominate, it invited. And yet, for all its calm and symbolism, it was also a tool of power. The more candles you had, the more status you held. The more light, the more authority. In some ways, this hasn't changed. Today, a candlelit dinner still feels special. A candlelit vigil still draws reverence. A single flame held aloft still commands silence. The difference now is choice. We no longer need candles. We light them because we want to. But once, for most of human history, that flame meant everything. Safety, structure, sacredness, power, and always time. For centuries, the candle stood at the center of life's rhythm. Its slow burn, the heartbeat of homes, cathedrals, and kingdoms alike. It lit births and burials, meals and manuscripts. It marked beginnings and endings with quiet consistency. But no invention, however sacred or beloved, lives untouched by change. In time, even the candle would meet its rival. Not in flame, but in wire. Not in silence, but in the hum of innovation. And so began its quiet retreat from the everyday. But it didn't happen overnight. Before electricity swept across cities and into homes, another kind of light was already reshaping the world: gaslight. In the late 18th century, engineers in Britain began experimenting with the use of coal gas as a fuel. By 1807, gas lamps lit the streets of London, and by the mid-19th century, much of Europe and the United States had adopted gaslight for both public and private use. It was brighter than candlelight. It didn't smoke or drip, and once installed it could burn for hours with minimal effort. But while the city outside began to glow with a new kind of flame, inside the home, candles remained. For a time, gaslight at first was costly and dangerous. Early systems were prone to leaks. Explosions, though rare, were not unheard of. And there was something impersonal about its glare. Candles, by contrast, were familiar. Their light was softer, warmer. Their flicker told stories. Their scent, especially in beeswax, still whispered of tradition. In parlors and studies, bedrooms and kitchens, candles lingered, not out of necessity alone, but out of preference. Yet, as with all progress, comfort eventually gave way to convenience. By the 1870s and 1880s, electric light was no longer a theory, it was a reality. Thomas Edison, among others, had developed a bulb that was reliable, safe, and increasingly affordable. With electric grids expanding, homes that once relied on fire, candles, oil lamps, gaslight, now had a new option: a switch. A press of the finger, immediate light, no melting, no trimming, no waiting. The bulb offered something candles could not: permanence. With electricity, light no longer had to be watched, managed, or protected. It simply was. And so the candle, for the first time in its long, luminous life, began to fade. Factories that once produced wax by the ton shifted toward new industries. Chandlers, now obsolete as tradesmen, either adapted or disappeared. Entire professions vanished as the world moved forward, not with a roar, but with a click. The transition was not universal. In rural areas, far from cities and grids, candles remained essential. They sat on mantels, were tucked in drawers, lined up on shelves in winter months. But their days as a daily tool were numbered. By the early 20th century, candle use had declined drastically in industrialized countries. They no longer illuminated the ordinary. They were now reserved for the extraordinary. Holiday tables, religious altars, moments of silence, moments of love. It's worth pausing here to reflect on what was lost, not just practically, but culturally. The world lit by candles was a world that moved more slowly. Evenings were gradual, nights were deliberate. People prepared for darkness. They respected it. They lived with it. With electric light, night became elastic. The boundary between work and rest blurred. Cities pulsed 24 hours a day. The hum of neon, fluorescent, and LED erased the need for flicker. And with that erasure came the loss of something subtle but essential: the pause. Candles had required attention. They needed to be lit, trimmed, extinguished. They burned unevenly. They signaled time by how quickly they consumed themselves. A stub meant bedtime. A fresh candle meant a fresh start. Electric light, in contrast, was constant, reliable, boring even. It lacked character. It did its job perfectly. And in that perfection, it became invisible. But candles, even in their retreat, refused to vanish entirely. Because light, true light, is more than function. By the mid-20th century, the candle had found a new identity. One of mood. Romantic dinners, bubble baths, vigils, ceremonies. Wherever emotion was present, candles returned. They no longer lit the path to the barn or guided the hand across the page. But they glowed beside toasts and whispered promises. They were lit not for necessity, but for presence. This new role was quieter, more symbolic. Candles became representations rather than requirements. They evoked memory. They suggested intention. They added weight to a moment, not by volume but by silence. Manufacturers noticed. Candles were now produced not in bulk for mass illumination, but in curated collections. Scents were added: lavender, sandalwood, vanilla. Shapes changed: columns, spheres, tea lights. Colors expanded, each hue meant to signal a feeling or an event. And yet, despite this evolution, the essence remained: a wick, some wax, a flame. It's a paradox, really, that in the age of instant light, we still reach for the slow one. Why? Perhaps because the candle reminds us that not everything must be immediate, that sometimes we choose slowness, that flicker has meaning, that imperfection is beauty. Consider this. A family sits in a home during a power outage. The television is dark, the hum of appliances is gone, and in the silence, a single candle is lit. The children watch it. The parents sit close. Voices soften. Time slows. The candle hasn't returned to prominence, but in its own way, it never left. There is something eternal in its simplicity. It does not need a network. It does not wait for updates. It does not flash or blink. It burns. And in doing so, it offers not just light, but a chance to remember. Remember what it was to sit in shadow and listen, to tell stories by glow, to rest not under buzz or glare, but under the quiet watch of something living and warm. Because yes, a flame is alive. It breathes, it consumes, it dances, it dies. And in its life, brief as it may be, we see our own. As technology marched forward, bringing us bulbs, screens, and glowing signs, the candle remained behind, not as an antique, but as a keeper of memory, of rhythm, of ritual. Even today, when the power fails, we don't turn to our phones for light. Not at first. We reach for a drawer, we pull out a match, and we light a candle. Because deep down we remember, not in words perhaps, not in facts or dates, but in feeling, that first light, that safe warmth, that small, flickering companion against the dark. There are moments in history when a change is so gradual, so smooth, so silently accepted, that we don't notice something is gone until much later. The candle's retreat from daily life wasn't dramatic. It wasn't mourned in the streets or marked by ceremony. And yet, in the soft extinguishing of that ancient flame, something slipped away with it. Something quieter, more human. What did we lose when the lights came on? At first it seemed like everything was gained. Electricity brought certainty. No more stumbling for matches in the dark. No more wax dripping onto books or furniture. No more trimming of wicks or sudden gusts that left a room in darkness. With a single switch, light appeared. It was clean, efficient, unchanging. And with this, the world stretched. Shops stayed open later. Workers labored longer. Factories pulsed into the night. Nighttime, once a natural pause, became elastic. Sleep schedules shifted. Darkness no longer meant stillness. It just meant lower settings on a brighter machine. The world brightened. And yet, the soul of the evening dimmed. Because when we removed the ritual of light, we also removed the attention it demanded. Lighting a candle was once a decision, a gesture, a promise to the moment. You didn't light one carelessly. You noticed it. You watched it. You understood that the flame was not forever, but a bulb, a lamp. You flick it, you forget it. It's always there. And in that constancy, meaning dissolves. We lost the sense of light as presence. With candles, light was a guest. It arrived with respect. It left with silence. It burned with purpose. Today, light is an assumption. We enter a room and it's already lit. We leave a room and the light stays on. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight, forgotten entirely. And yet something in us still craves the older way. Why else do we gather around bonfires? Why do we light candles for birthdays? Why do we still mark vigils with small flames, one for each soul, each prayer, each name whispered into the dark? Because we remember, on some level, that a flame means something. In recent years, candles have made a curious return, not as necessity, but as intimacy. Walk into any home decor store and you'll find entire aisles dedicated to them. Scented candles for stress relief, decorative candles for ambiance, prayer candles in rows of colors and saints, luxury candles in ceramic jars with names like amber dusk or silent wood. They aren't lit for vision, they're lit for feeling. And in that return, we see something profound. That even when function is gone, symbol remains. A candle is no longer needed to read, but we still place one beside our books. We no longer rely on it to cook, but we light one when guests arrive. We no longer count hours by wax, but we still track emotion by flame. Because what we lost when the lights came on was not light itself, it was intention, it was slowness, it was the sacred space between action and rest. Think about this. When the sun sets, and the house is quiet, when the noise of the day has faded and the lists are done and the tasks complete, you may feel a small, persistent desire. Not for entertainment, not for distraction, but for glow. Not glare, not brightness, not blue light, but glow. The kind that flickers, that warms, that holds the dark at bay without erasing it. The kind that allows mystery to stay. That's candlelight. And that's what we forgot. That not all darkness is danger. That some shadows are meant to remain. That light is not the enemy of sleep, but a partner to it when it knows when to rest. The candle never fought the dark. It partnered with it. It softened it. It made space inside it. Electricity taught us to overcome. Candles taught us to coexist. In losing the candle, we lost a model of balance. But perhaps it was never truly lost. Because despite all progress, despite all speed, despite all invention, we still light them. When the world is too loud, when grief feels too wide, when joy is too much to say aloud, we light a candle. And when we do, something in us settles. A breath slows, a room quiets, a heart listens. Because the candle doesn't speak, it reminds. It reminds us of dinners long past, of bedtime stories told by glow, of prayers whispered into warm air, of nights where everything important happened after the flame was lit. It reminds us that life is not always meant to be efficient, that moments are not always meant to be bright, that love, grief, memory, rest, they ask for softness, and candles give it freely. Even now, as you listen, perhaps your room is dark, perhaps a screen glows beside you, or maybe somewhere nearby a candle is lit. And if it is, let it burn slowly. Don't rush, don't explain, just watch. Watch how it bends, how it breathes, how it says everything without a word. This story began with fire, with the first humans huddled in caves watching flame against stone. And it ends here. With you, in the stillness, in the quiet, in the space between light and sleep. Because what we lost when the lights came on, we find again every time we choose the candle. Not for what it does, but for what it means. Let it burn, let it fade, let it become the memory that holds you just long enough to let go.